Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is the 8-hour chart of silver provided by netdania.com. You can click on the link below. Now I'm concentrating on the primary trend line here. It's very clear. It's not drawn all the way back as far as it can go, but it is drawn more than a year. And you can see that the touch points are very clear. The attempted breakouts are very clear. These attempted breakouts were met by Fed Newspeak, and as I pointed out before, with the rate of decline in the price of silver, you really only need to project a certain number of months out to get to a price of zero. Now, obviously, that cannot occur. Something has to give. And you have to remember these are fake numbers. Everything that we see now are fake numbers. I'm going to prove to you that the numbers are fake. But the silver numbers are fake as well. Nevertheless, this is the price of the paper silver. Now, you have to remember that the way that this game works is that there's a certain number of speculators in the futures market, and they're betting on the possibility that silver has made a bottom, that paper silver has made a bottom. And they can make a lot of paper money if they're right. Now, we've consistently seen that the Federal Reserve has stepped in at key points and had their minions in the bullion banks, etc., sell down the paper silver. But this can't go on. This has to reverse. We're already down to a price of 21 on paper silver, where if we break through that, this downtrend is finished. Now, the bottom that we've put in here, you can see it's an interesting bottom. It is forming kind of a cup and saucer formation. Will this be the bottom? I don't know. I can't tell you. Only the people who are manipulating these things know the answer to that question. But before we get to the main story of the night, and that's going to be the fake numbers, let's look at this news release that came out tonight. This is hitting all the wires. House and Senate negotiators reach a budget deal. I'm going to read some of this, and then we're going to go straight to the numbers. House and Senate negotiators have reached agreement on an $85 billion package to fund the government past January 15th, avoid another federal shutdown, and end the cycle of budget crises that have dominated Washington for much of the past 3 years. The deal did not include a key priority of House Democrats who wanted an extension of long-term benefits for the unemployed. Now, why do you have to have an extension of long-term benefits for unemployed people when we're in a recovery? Because we're not in a recovery. It's all lies. But Democrats said they would continue to press Republicans on the issue in hopes of preventing more than 1 million people from losing their unemployment checks at the end of the month. Senate Budget Committee Chairman Patty Murray and House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan unveiled the deal, which would partially repeal sharp agency spending cuts known as the sequester in fiscal 2014 and 15. Now that is laughable. There have never been sharp cuts. I'm going to show you that when we get to the debt clock here. Those savings would be replaced by roughly $63 billion in other policies, including fee increases for airline travelers, cuts to federal worker and military pensions, and higher payments for federal insurance of private pensions, according to people familiar with the talks. Ryan and Murray were rushing to file legislation before midnight so the House could vote as soon as Thursday and leave town for the year by the weekend. The Senate, which is scheduled to leave town next week, would vote thereafter. The agreement would set the budget for the Pentagon and other federal agencies at $1 trillion for fiscal 2014 and $1 trillion for fiscal 2015, preventing a new $20 billion hit to defense spending from taking effect in January. Domestic agencies would get a bump of equal size. The $63 billion price tag would be covered with a mix of policies, roughly half spending cuts and half new non-tax revenues. You can't make this stuff up. Among those policies, $20 billion in reduced contributions to federal pensions, split evenly between new civilian workers and military retirees. For those in the military, the reduction would take the form of lower cost of living increases for retirees under age 62, many of whom take other jobs while collecting their military pensions. In addition to partially replacing the sequester, the deal calls for another $25 billion in deficit reduction by extending a small part of the sequester into 2022 and 23. That shift would primarily affect Medicare providers. So, what a joke. Outright laughable, ridiculous nonsense, the numbers they're putting out. These are fake numbers. Now let's get to the meat of this. Now this isn't something that takes a rocket scientist. Anybody can do this. You can take the national debt clock and you can take your calculator on your computer. So I want to show you a series of numbers here. Now, if you stare at this debt clock, and you can see whether certain things are going up, certain things are going down, you can get an idea of how fake the numbers are. There's a lot of things I wanted to point out, but the numbers weren't changing. So let's look at some real outliers that stand out here. Let's start out with, these are the largest budget items. So we're going to start out with the largest budget items and looking at net interest on debt. So now people are going to criticize me by saying that, well, you aren't looking at the trust fund. There is no trust fund, and you're not looking at this or that. So I'm just going to take the raw numbers and then leave it at that. You can work out the details. So the raw numbers here for national debt is $17.222 trillion. You can see down here under largest budget items, the net interest on the debt is $254 billion. So that's not that hard to do. Let's take $254 billion, that's 0.0000000, divided by 17.222 trillion. And that is 1.47% interest rate. So right there, you're being told that the interest rate on this $17 trillion plus debt is less than 1.5%. That number doesn't make any sense at all. We know that the U.S. government is already bankrupt, and the fact that a bankrupt entity is paying less than 1.5% interest, we know that's less than the admitted rate of inflation, much less the shadow stats rate. So clearly that is a fake number. Now let me show you another fake number. This number, $229 billion, this is the amount paid every year into federal pensions. So that's a big part of the budget. And if you remember, Ryan and Murray supposedly talked about this. So let's do the math on that. You've got $229 billion a year going into federal pensions. And you can go down here and look on the right-hand side. You have 4,367,000 federal employees. So let's do the math on that. We've got $229 billion every year divided by 4.3 million federal workers. And that comes to $53,000 per person per year. $53,000 per year. Boy, don't you wish they would put $53,000 a year in your pension every year, year after year. So that is a fake number. There is no way that that is possible. Maybe I'm missing something on the math. You explain it to me. I don't know what I'm missing. But I'm seeing 4.3 million federal employees and $229 billion a year going into their pensions. And, by the way, that number's rising. Now, you want to look at the numbers that are rising and how fast they're rising. Let's look at these budget items. You've got Medicare at $768 billion. That number's rising. You've got Social Security, $811 billion. That number's rising. You've got the Defense Department. That number's falling. But you've got income security. If you're like me, you're like, what's that? Well, that is supplemental security income, earned income credits, unemployment compensation, nutrition assistance, family support, child nutrition, foster care, and making work pay. Source, the CBO. And you've got, of course, our net interest on debt. Notice that number is falling. Now, you explain to me how when we're paying 1.4 something percent interest, that the interest could be falling as the debt is rising. Craziness. And then there's our federal pensions. So let's go ahead and do the calculator one more time here. I'm going to add up the transfer payments. These transfer payments are going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul. In other words, this is money taken from one person and given to another. I'm not talking about money that it takes to run the various agencies. I'm not talking about money that it takes to build highways, fix roads, dig holes, whatever the government's supposed to do. I'm just talking about money that you take from one person and give to another. So for Medicare and Medicaid, we've got $768 billion. And we've got Social Security at $811 billion. We're going to skip defense. And we've got income security at $348 billion. And we've got federal pensions at $229 billion. And you can see we're at $2.156 trillion. Now, let's add in this fake interest at 1.5%, and that's $254 billion. And there's your number of $2.4 trillion that is purely transfer payments from one person to another. This doesn't include the military. This doesn't include the cost of running any agency of the federal government. This is strictly transfer payments from one person to another, and you got $2.4 trillion. And what's your total federal tax revenue? $2.8 trillion. Now, we know that the interest rate number is fake. It should be at least 3 times that number. 3 times that number would give us another $500 billion. And I didn't have the plus on that. And that other $500 billion would put us over this federal tax revenue. So we're already bankrupt just on the amount of money that is transfer payments from one person to another. There isn't even any money left to run the government. The government is completely bankrupt. Now, here's why the government's bankrupt. You have a population of 317 million people, and you only have 114 million income taxpayers. You have a workforce of 143 million, but again, only 114 million of them pay income tax. You've got 91 million people not in the labor force. You got official 10 million unemployed, 20 million actual. You got 46 million retirees, 14 million disabled, 47 million food stamps, 19 million state and local employees, and 4 million federal employees. So the whole thing is completely bankrupt. 100% of all tax revenues are just taken from one person and given to another. There's no money left to run the government. The government is completely broke. So that's why you're going to see an explosive rally in silver. You're going to see the same thing in gold. You're already seeing something similar in Bitcoin. I know a lot of silver bugs and gold bugs are not fans of Bitcoin, but so far Bitcoin has been the non-inflationary currency. Everybody said it's over. Well, it's not over. They're piling in. They're going to pile in. This chart of Bitcoin, that is what the silver chart should look like. Silver should be tenfold. It should be 100-fold of what it is right now, when the realization is made by everyone that there is not any money left, not a penny left to run the government. Every single penny now is taken from one person and given to another, and that can't continue. And we'll talk to you next time.